Today on The Report, we discuss how Senator Booker broke a segregationist congressional record,
why the Trump administration scrutinizes Mohammed Khalil's green card application,
plus Selena Quintanilla's killer denied parole,
and the fate of the Department of Education. The Report starts now.
Welcome back to another episode of The Report. I'm Allison Goyich.
I'm Juliana White.
I'm Alejandra Chavez.
And I'm Mariana Hartman. Don't forget to follow our Titan TV Instagram at Titan TV CSUF to keep in touch with us and view our latest content.
New Jersey Senator Cory Booker took to the Senate floor on Monday at 7 p.m. to denounce the Trump administration's agenda for as long as he physically could with no bathroom breaks or food. His speech was not a filibuster, but an act of political endurance to critique the Trump administration at the podium. Booker sifted through letters and emails he received from frustrated Americans who demanded for a combative fight for democracy. After 25 hours of speaking and limping off the Senate floor, Booker set the congressional record for the longest Senate speech. His historic marathon surpassed Senator Storm Thurmond of South Carolina, a segregationist who used a filibuster against the Civil Rights Act in 1957. As a descendant of slaves and slave owners, Booker said he felt that although Thurmond was powerful, quote, the people were more powerful, end quote.
Booker's preparation included over 1,164 pages of material. He rallied for hours against cuts to Social Security offices and Medicaid benefits, addressed constituents' concerns of the president's desire to annex Greenland and Canada, and the dismantling of government programs and institutions. Democratic colleagues joined and helped Booker gain momentum in the chamber to prevent him from surrendering to the watchful GOP. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer clocked the accomplishment, telling Booker, quote, "Do you know how proud this caucus is of you? Do you know how proud America is of you?" End quote. As a symbol of Democratic frustration, Booker offered America a hopeful moment to inspire a mass popular uprising against Donald Trump. Okay, so his speech, he went for 25 hours, breaking the previous record, which is an amazing accomplishment. Do you think that his speech was revolutionary for the Democratic Party?
It definitely was revolutionary, and the fact that he was able to speak for 25 hours, breaking the record of the segregationist from back in the civil rights movement days, is just phenomenal. It's such a great accomplishment, and I think it definitely is going to revolutionize the Democratic Party.
I think this is exactly what the party was needing. I know there was a lot of communication, not only in the party, but also just Americans, as a whole, who do consider themselves a part of the Democratic Party as well, have been wanting the Democrats to step up more, to take more action, especially because they don't have the majority in Congress anymore. In order to pass certain laws or to help certain laws not be passed, they're not able to get that majority vote that they need unless they also work with the Republicans as well. And then I was reading an interview that Booker did with NPR where he was talking about how he wants to, befriend some of the Republicans, on the other side in order to help with these issues because they also agree with Booker and everything that he said in his speech as well. So it's more just, I think the purpose of his speech in general was just to help both parties kind of come together during this very kind of chaotic time and be like, okay, let's set our differences aside right now and all agree on this common goal together.
Yeah, it definitely leaves me speechless just to think this man was talking for 25 hours straight, no breaks, just waiting for his other people in the Senate to ask questions so he can have a little break. It literally leaves me speechless, mostly because he talked about everything. He talked about the mass deportation, the plans to dismantle the Department of Education, and he even asked for forgiveness for the part of the Democrat Party because he acknowledged that they have made some mistakes. So it's good to see that he acknowledges that and he hopes to do better. A recent update on Mahmoud Khalil's arrest this past March has continued to spark national debate. Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian activist and graduate student at Columbia University, was arrested last month by ICE on allegations of visa fraud. Officials claim he failed to disclose previous employment and affiliations, including work with a Palestinian refugee agency. The Trump administration defended the arrest, stating it is part of a broader crackdown on immigration violations that pose national security risks. According to DHS, Khalil's case is being used as an example of the administration's zero-tolerance policy on student visas.
In a letter released by the ACLU, Khalil called himself a, quote, political prisoner, end quote, and said his detention is about silencing Palestinian voices. He denies any wrongdoings and says he is being targeted for his activism and free speech. His case has sparked wider fears among international students. Badar Khansuri, a South Korean student at Columbia, recently faced deportation before a judge temporarily blocked it. Dr. Rasha Alawi, a Brown University scholar, was deported to Lebanon after the government allegedly said she had ties to Hezbollah, a claim her lawyers deny. The Trump administration's response to her deportation was a controversial Bye-Bye Rasha post on social media. Critics say these incidents reflect a dangerous trend of targeting scholars and students based on their nationality, religion, or political beliefs, raising serious questions about free speech, academic freedom, and human rights. Wow, there is a lot to kind of take away from that particular story in general. And New York Times even stated that almost around 150 college students have their visas taken away and are facing potential deportation. And that we've already talked about this before, how it brings up a lot of like freedom of speech and exactly how students, even though they are from different countries and are living in the U.S. with green cards, are being threatened by this. I would like to know your guys' thoughts on it because it's a really sad situation to hear about.
Well, yeah, it really shocks me because ABC News talk about like this student, he's Duke student, he's a basketball star at school, and it says that he just got deported because of his nationality from being from South Sudan, which is totally unfair to him. Additionally to the other tough student that actually got arrested by ICE just because of writing an opinion article in her school's newspaper. So I'm really disappointed in this situation, and me as an international student, I can understand the struggle that a lot of people have been going through with their visa and how scary it is.
Yeah, I think it's an abuse of power right now, and especially aside from students speaking out and being detained, you're also having people who just simply have tattoos on who have been detained. One story from MSNBC, the headline says the Trump admin reportedly deports man over autism awareness tattoo, and a lot of people were saying, oh, it was a gang tattoo, or did other people who had similar tattoos, they're saying, oh, it's gang related. That's why they're being detained. But it's not. It's just an abuse of power right now.
Right. We're kind of posing the question of where do we draw the line? What does the system look like? People who are actually violent offenders or felons are not being deported or arrested the way that they should be by ICE, and they're the ones who are really bringing a detriment to our country, not the students who are using their freedom of speech or voicing their opinions on international relations or national happenings. It's really scary that these students are going through that, and that people who actually should be deported or should be looked at by ICE are not. This past March 31st marked 30 years since the queen of Tejano music, Selena Quintanilla Perez, was tragically killed by her former fan club president, Yolanda Saldivar. Recently, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles denied parole to Saldivar, now 64 years old, who is serving a life sentence for the murder at Patrick L. O'Daniel unit in Gatesville. The board stated that the violent offenses indicated a continuing threat to public safety, and Saldivar won't be eligible for parole until 2030. Saldivar shot 23-year-old Selena with a .38 caliber revolver in her back in a Corpus Christi hotel room after being confronted with embezzling funds from Selena's fan club and clothing boutiques in 1995. In response to Saldivar's denied parole, Selena's family and former husband celebrated the win, stating, quote, "While nothing can bring Selena back, this reaffirms that justice continues to stand for the beautiful life that was taken," end quote.
Fans honored Selena with the premiere of the newly released documentary, Selena y los Dinos, directed by Emmy-nominated Mexican-American director Isabel Castro. The film, composed of original VHS footage captured by Selena's older sister, Suzette, as an ode to her pop star sister. Selena's powerful legacy stretches generations and continues to be a hallmark in Tejano culture, as her family said, quote, "We will continue to celebrate Selena's life, not the tragedy that took her from us," end quote. So, this case is very controversial, especially with the topic of Yolanda being released. So what are your guys' thoughts on this? Do you think she's safer in prison, or should she even be released after all these years?
I think that Selena being such an icon poses a threat to Yolanda in a way. She may have already served her time, but she may be safer in jail at this time because Selena was such an icon and so beloved by so many people in the Hispanic community.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff before about her fans coming out and saying, you know, the moment that Yolanda's released from prison, they're going to be there and they're going to be ready. And honestly, some of them would like to do the same treatment that she did to Selena.
Yeah, Selena was the it girl of the 90s. Everybody loved her, not only here in the States, but mostly everybody in America, entire continent. And it was definitely a tragedy for everybody. Like, they took it personally. I've heard people saying, like, is it Diana of America? And I totally agree with that statement. Her music's so good. And to be honest, the court took a good decision by leaving Yolanda on Yale, because she's dangerous for society, and I think society is dangerous for her too, so I'm not glad, but...
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword, I feel like. It's like, okay, you know, she should definitely stay in prison for what she did. That's what I personally believe, at least. But again, if she were released, then there would be so much. I can only imagine all the controversy that would come from that, and all the news articles and all the people's and opinions, and just the threat it would pose to her as well. You know, like, at the end of the day, violence should not be solved with more violence, if that makes sense. So, you know, at the end of the day, I do think that, I do agree with you all 100 that they do rule correctly. Cal State Fullerton professor of political science Rob Robinson is with the report special reporter Noah Cicadas to discuss the fate of the Department of Education.
Good evening, Titans. I'm here with political science professors Dr. Robinson and Dr. Jarvis. We're here today discussing the recent cuts introduced to the Department of Education from the Donald Trump administration. We're going to get right into it. Over the last few weeks, the Trump administration has pledged its desire to remove federal powers from the Department of Education in order to return funding to the states and local governments. What is the goal here with the new administration, would you say?
Well, I question some of the assumption you made. In order to return funding to the states and localities, I don't think they're doing that. They are getting rid of the Department of Education because this has been a Republican boogeyman ever since it was created in the late 70s. Every Republican president and almost every Republican who has run for president since then has been trying to get rid of the Department of Education. It doesn't actually do most of the funding for local education. Most of that is done through states or through local taxes. So primarily what it does is a lot of equalization, a lot of trying to make sure that natural differences between, let's say, the Central Valley of California and Manhattan in terms of the taxable base they have are equaled out. And they don't want that. So yeah, ironically, what's going to happen with this is if they do get rid of a lot of these fundings, it's actually going to hurt a lot of their base. A lot of the folks who voted for the Republican ticket are actually coming from areas that are not quite as well off. So in the end, it's actually shooting their own constituents in the foot.
Yeah, along the same lines, the department also has a role in helping disability and special needs kids who often have very high costs per student to educate. And I don't think getting rid of the department, they're not doing that to hurt that, but I think that is one of the things that it does do that will be affected.
Got you. And then simultaneously in our own state, Governor Gavin Newsom is preparing a budget cut to the Cal State University system of 8%, which would chalk up to about $375 million. Do you think this could be a possible ripple effect as a result from the recent federal actions that are being taken?
Well, it's my understanding that this 8% cut has been planned for a long time now, at least in terms of political time. So we've been hearing about it all of this academic year.
Gotcha.
It is possible that whatever happens in DC could make it worse, make the cuts more likely, because the planned cut by Newsom might not necessarily materialize if the state legislature is not on board, or it might be 4% or something less.
Gotcha.
But if we have less money, then it might make it more likely.
The state's cutting the budget largely because the state's budget is down. The receipts at the state level are just not quite where they expected them to be. So that's why the state's been trying to cut budgets for a while. They largely spared the Cal State system in last year's budget cuts. And this year, Newsom just didn't want to sort of do the same thing he did last time. Maybe that's because Newsom is trying to run for president and trying to project this more moderate image, not trying to look like a tax and spend liberal.
Right.
Or maybe it's just because at some point, when you're cutting budgets in California, you eventually get to core services like the Cal State. It's a little hard to tell, but it's largely not a federal story. It's just two separate crises coming to us in the Cal State system at the same time.
Yeah.
But they're really of a sort of different origin.
Yeah, when you're in a state like California and you rely primarily on the income tax for the bulk of your receipts, what that means is you have wild swings in tax receipts. You may remember a couple years ago we had a $76 billion surplus that then just gone, and so this is just something we have to live with in terms, unless we changed our tax base formula, because of things like Prop 13, income taxes are what we do.
And going back to the individual aspects of the Department of Education, you said balancing out, for example. The Department of Education Secretary recently stated that the proposed cuts offered by the president would instead increase the efficiency of the department without affecting funding for specific education, including student loans, high poverty schools. Is there a point to be possibly made here in a certain inefficiency implied by the Education Secretary themselves prior to the administration cuts?
And I have no doubt there are inefficiencies in the Department of Education. That's true of almost any big bureaucratic organization. And it was always a bit of an unwieldy organization. Having said that, it's not typical to take an organization, dramatically reduce staff, particularly in the chaotic way that's being done right now, and have it work better. So for example, if you're a student who wants to call about your student loans, and there's half the people there to take your call, you can imagine what that's like, right? It just makes things worse. So I'm on board with the idea that you could improve how the Department of Education works. I am completely off the train when it comes to what they're doing now will make it better.
Yeah, if efficiency is sort of work product divided by the amount you spend on it, getting rid of, or the reverse, getting rid of the amount you're spending doesn't necessarily technically makes you more efficient if you're assuming all the work is going to happen without this. If you get rid of the Department of Education, there are simply things that they were doing that they are not going to do anymore. So putting all the student loans off onto the Small Business Administration. Yes, the Small Business Administration is in the business of giving loans out. They're in the business of giving loans out for people who usually have some collateral. It's a very different loan situation. They are not really in the business of connecting millions of borrowers with thousands of various banking institutions to connect with the funding situation and have a federally regulated process for people to get extensions, people to get deferrals, and all kinds of things. So the Small Business Administration does loans, yes. They've never done these. So expecting them to be more efficient is kind of like here at Cal State Fullerton, expecting a math major to be more efficient at writing poetry. You're asking someone to do something they haven't done before. That math major may be a perfectly good poet. They're not going to be a really good poet on day one.
Now, there has been, of course, heavy pushback to these budget cuts and changes, including the removal of the federal student loan portfolio to the Small Business Administration. How do you think individuals at a local level can communicate their outrage against these changes?
Well, it's not always easy because they're not always responsive, but I think the obvious answer is to make your member of Congress's life very uncomfortable. I think there is the belief that politicians don't listen to their constituents or care among the general public. I found that not to be true. The average politician is a coward who is afraid of being unelected the next election, and the best way to make them worry about that is to communicate your displeasure frequently, politely, but frequently, whether that's through a protest, whether that's through trying to call their office, writing a letter. They are paying attention, particularly in Orange County in House districts that are competitive. They do worry about this. That's why you see people not doing town halls anymore, because they don't want bad press.
There's a saying with Congress that there's two types of members of Congress, paranoids and losers. If you're not paranoid about winning re-election, you're going to lose. You must always be focused on winning re-election. So as Professor Robinson just said, these town halls have been getting canceled by Republicans, not so much because they're afraid of the people there yelling at them. They're used to people yelling at them. But they don't want the story the next day in the newspaper about thousands of people, hundreds of people went and yelled at them. They don't want to project that image of being weak, because that'll encourage a challenger. They don't want to project that image of being unliked, because that'll make people go, yeah, you know what, I had a problem with Representative Johnson too. So they really have to try to maintain that. So yeah, members of Congress will call you back if you call them. They won't, well, not call, but they'll send you a letter saying thanks for your contact. You listen to them on the floor, and they will constantly tell you, oh, the calls coming into my office are running 4-1 against this or 3-1 for this. They pay attention to people contacting them. That's the amount of effort it takes to contact a member of Congress is a lot. The amount of effort it takes to vote in the election is very little. So if they pay attention to the people who are calling them, who are writing them, they're pretty sure that's actually going to help them with votes. And that's the thing they do care about. Because whether you have somebody who is bilking the system and getting rich on the side, or whether you have somebody who's in there to make good public policy, no matter whether you have a good or a bad politician, they can't do what they're there to do if they aren't there. So they all care about re-election.
One final question here. Where would you see the Department of Education 4 years from now at the end of the second Donald Trump administration?
It's a very good question that I don't have a great answer for. A lot of it will probably depend on the outcome of court challenges that are winding their way through the system, and maybe the responses to different bureaucratic changes that are being challenged in the courts, or stuff involving immigration or whatever. And so I think that's going to be a big story is, some of what is being done with the Department of Education is within the president's power to do, and some of it probably isn't. And then if a court says no, what happens next? Are you forced to rehire people? So I think I'm just not sure, I guess. A lot of uncertainty.
There's the fun thing about this is, of course, that the president can't just simply get rid of a department. That's made by an act of Congress. It takes Congress to get rid of it. But what you do have is a majority party in Congress that has seen fit to basically say whatever that guy wants, we're doing, including things that they themselves were not a fan of 2 weeks ago. They are just in line. The Republican Party is. That's at least in the House. The Senate is where you have historically found, and when you are finding today, much more resistance to this. And that's where I think the rubber will meet the road, is whether the Senate decides to actually start standing up and pushing back on some of this stuff. And then you get into a question of courts. Because so far this administration has basically just decided to not really care about the legalities of things. And are the courts going to step up? And right now, what you see is a number of courts have been stepping up, and they've been getting attacked by Republicans in the House and even Republicans in the Senate for basically doing their jobs. So it really, we will see over the next 3 to 6 months whether or not we still actually have a democracy or whether we've actually entered a phase where we call competitive authoritarianism, where we have an election every 4 years and we elect a dictator.
Dr. Jarvis, Dr. Robinson, thank you both for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, reporting with a very special segment of the report, I'm Noah Sakadas. Back to you in the studio, ladies.
Thanks, Noah. And with that, that's all we have for today.
Have a great week, Titans.
And stay tuned for more news, views, and info.
We will see you next time on The Report.